Hello, everyone. Welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Jamie Hinkle. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the Learning and Inclusion Manager at PFLAG National. Just like every week, we are going to bring in Jean Marie Nevada to host today's conversation.
Jamie Hinkle. Hi, Jamie Hinkle.
You're in a different place.
I am in a totally different place. I'm actually in Florida. I have been allowed out of the state of California momentarily, although I'm sure I will be returning very soon.
Interesting. Did you go to Universal Studios?
No, I didn't. I can't do the Harry Potter ride without you. It would just never be the same. I'd feel so lonely.
Yeah, well, we're not here to talk about that, so I'm going to let you take it away.
Bye, JB. Jamie Hinkle is actually my Patronus, just so you know. Hello, everybody. I am Jean Marie Nevada, the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National, and every single week we get together to talk about something related to LGBTQ equality and inclusion. And this week we are talking about LGBTQ elders and seniors and aging, and how this all becomes part of a conversation that we all need to have. So first of all, if you are reading this week's article and you're looking for some questions to talk about this yourself, our article came from Seniors Matter. It's a website. The author was Melanie Kalmar, and it was called Recent Executive Order Champions the Rights of LGBTQ Seniors in Care Communities. And it basically talks about a recent executive order. We're going to get into a conversation around that. But it also talks about a lot of the challenges that LGBTQ seniors face, especially as they enter healthcare facilities and longer-term care facilities. In fact, in 2021, HRC did some research and they revealed that only 18% of senior housing actually has non-discrimination policies that are inclusive of both sexual orientation and gender identity. And as the population ages more, this becomes an ever so relevant conversation for us. And of course, you cannot possibly talk about LGBTQ elders unless you have your friends from SAGE in the house. So today I am happy to welcome back a returning guest, proving you cannot run too far from PFLAG before we find you again, Sherrill Wayland, who is the Director of Special Initiatives at SAGE. Hey, Sherrill. And we are also bringing in Erin Tax, who's the Managing Director of Government Affairs and Policy Advocate, also at SAGE. Hello, Erin, and welcome for your first time.
Thank you.
And welcome back, Sherrill. It's good to see you.
Thank you so much, Jean Marie. I can't imagine a better way to spend my Thursday afternoon.
I like hearing that. I'm so happy that we're together. What people don't know is that before the show started, Sherrill and I were singing, and it may still happen, depending on where
it could.
I like keeping it, a little lively. So before we go any further, Sherrill, maybe we can start with you. And can you just tell people who might be new to the program or who haven't seen you before a little bit about what SAGE is and how people can find out more about the organization?
Sure, I would love to, Jean Marie. Thank you. So SAGE is the country's largest and oldest organization dedicated to improving the lives of LGBTQ plus older adults. Our mission is to lead in addressing issues related to LGBTQ plus aging. We oftentimes say that we're the aging voice within the LGBTQ plus community and the LGBTQ plus voice within the aging community. Our headquarters are in New York City, and we offer a number of local and national programs, including the first ever LGBTQ plus senior center in New York City, the National Housing Initiative, National Resource Center on LGBTQ plus aging, and our credentialing and training program, SAGE Care. You can learn more about SAGE at sageusa.org.
Thank you so much. And if you've never checked out SAGE's website, I really, really encourage you to take a look. Their work is phenomenal. Their research and their policy work is also so powerful. And I think you really do cross into so many different spaces in our community. So, as I was getting ready for this show, I was thinking about, as a member of the community, we tend to be a pretty youth-oriented, putting a very high premium on our youth community, almost to the point where I have found that discussions on aging often don't happen, or where they happen, people get really extraordinarily uncomfortable with that discussion. So Erin, maybe we could start with you, because I'd like to hear both of your perspectives. Why do you think this is the case? And are you seeing it changing? And if you are, why?
I think people are afraid of getting old. I think the narrative around aging is generally about bad things, like not being able to get around as well as you could in the past, perhaps not having the money you have in the past. So it's really framed very much as a negative rather than a positive. And I think for those reasons, overlaid on top of all the, youth focus within the LGBT community, it just kind of makes people not want to discuss it. And, I remember speaking to someone not very many months ago, who's like, I basically said, he didn't want to get old. And I said, well, the alternative is not so hot. And he didn't really seem to care like that. He really just didn't want to go there or think about it or talk about it. And unfortunately, I don't think that's too uncommon.
Wow.
But we are trying to change the narrative and to talk about resiliency and all the amazing contributions that older people have made and continue to make. So we have our work cut out for us, but we're trying.
I think it's really interesting because you said looking at it in the positive, looking at resiliency. I think when I look at the SAGE site, when I look at some of the stories that you see coming out of those who you're supporting, they are very much about that. They are people who probably the most difficult odds in our community, who are growing up in a time even more adverse than we're looking at now. And I think that is such a good spin. Sherrill, what about you? What are your feelings on that one?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Aaron said. And I also think, across society, we oftentimes focus on youth because we were once young. We know what that was like. We know what the challenges are. And so it's easy for us to really frame a lot of our work around youth and making the world a better place to be young, right? We've not been old, so it's harder for us to think about what that's like. I think within the LGBTQ community, there's 2 programs that I just want to give a shout out to, and that would be Prime Timers, which is an older adult men's social group and support group, and then also OLOC, which is Old Lesbians Organizing for Change. I think both of those organizations really lift up, the voices of older adults and celebrate being old. And so I think that's something that we can really look to as a possibility model for all of us.
And I love that. I love the idea of possibility models. And I think that as we see them, they become real and they become accessible and they actually become kind of desirable. Like, I know that I've looked at some of these stories and some of these programs and thought, that's who I want to be. That's exactly the kind of person that I want to be. And I think it really does take some of the fear and the sting out of it. So, there do tend, I think we can all concede that there are inadequate conversations around aging in our community. And there are so many different reasons that we can look at that. But it doesn't mean we can ignore the issue, because eventually we are all going to get there. And even if we're not there yet, we do have a responsibility to take care of other people in our space. And yet a lot of people don't realize the depth of some of the challenges that LGBTQ elders and seniors are facing. I mean, that statistic that we started with, that as of just a couple of years ago or a year ago, only 18% of senior housing facilities had non-discrimination policies that were inclusive. That's just one aspect of it. We see so many things spin out of that, like seniors going back in the closet as they enter different care. So could you talk a little bit, both of you, and maybe Aaron, we can start with you and then move over to Sherrill too, about what some of these challenges are and which ones are very specific to LGBTQ elders, perhaps because of systemic holes or remaining biases?
So one way I think about it is many of the issues that LGBTQ plus older folks face are similar to the issues that the general older population faces, but much more pronounced. So first among them are social isolation, twice as likely to be single, 4 times less likely to have kids than their heterosexual and cisgender counterparts, higher rates of poverty, particularly pronounced among lesbian couples, with twice the poverty rate of their heterosexual counterparts. And then all of that with a lack of access to culturally competent services and supports. And that can be even on the LGBT side of the house, where, until recently, and probably even still today to some degree, many older folks don't like to use the word queer. They might not even want to identify publicly as an LGBT person. So there was an outreach program at a senior center in Texas that used the word LGBT in the title, and people weren't showing up. And they finally asked them why that wasn't the case. And it turns out they didn't want to tell their friends they're going to an LGBT program. So they changed the name to something equally, if not more gay, with like rainbows in it. And that was okay. So it kind of speaks to the importance of language with this population, like all populations, but particularly this population. Or, say you ran the queer center. Maybe people aren't going to show up to that either, because maybe that appeals to younger people, but maybe not so much older people. So there's work to be done even in our community in terms of reaching out to this population. And I'm sure Sherrill might have more observations on this.
Yeah, I again really agree with everything that Aaron has said. I think, the other thing is when it comes to housing in particular, oftentimes we may be leaving the house that we've spent our entire lives in to move to a long-term care community. And I think that's why the work of SAGE and the HRC Foundation with the Long-Term Care Quality Index, as well as SAGE's National Housing Initiative, is so important. Because if you're moving to a place where you don't feel welcomed, then the challenges are just going to be that much more amplified. So it's really important that we continue to find these spaces that want to be LGBTQ welcoming and invite them to be LGBTQ welcoming.
Yeah.
And I'll put in a plug for the resource center that Sherrill runs, the National Resource Center on LGBT Aging, because it has a ton of different guides, including how to make LGBT organizations more LGBT friendly and other organizations more friendly to LGBT folks, writ large. So there's lots of great materials there.
Oh, thank you for doing that. As you look at, because we know the population as a whole is aging. We have a huge generation that is entering what is considered to be senior years. Are you seeing the growth? Because I've noticed, I live in Palm Springs, which is kind of known as a very good party place, but also a great place for queer people to retire. And I'm noticing more and more facilities being built that are very targeted towards LGBTQ elders. So long-term care, assisted living, things like that. Are you seeing a growth in places like that, as well as more mainstream places trying to become more competent, or is it a little bit of both?
I'd say a little bit of both. One thing we certainly realize at SAGE is, to the extent that, folks are willing to build places like this is great. To the extent that we can help other folks build LGBT elder-friendly housing, that's great. But it's also, a situation where we can't build our way out of this. Not every single community in the country is going to have the capacity or the resources to build LGBT-friendly housing. So as much as we'd like to see those places being built, we are also very much working towards making sure that the mainstream places that are out there are more welcoming. And I think, the project that Sherrill pointed to, the Long-Term Care Equality Index, is a step in that direction to make sure that the wide array of housing out there is more LGBT friendly as folks continue to age.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, for every person that wants to move to Palm Springs, a number of people want to stay in Oklahoma, in Texas, in Arkansas. These are the places that we call home. And so to be able to go to the same places where our neighbors go, where our friends go, that's important. And so it's really, that's why some of this work around, inclusion, equity, and belonging is so important, so that people can remain in their communities and feel like it's a place for them to call home.
I'm so glad that you made that point, because it is a privilege to be able to go to a place that is ostensibly more inclusive, but it also does mean pulling away from a community that you potentially lived in your entire life. And actually, I think that leads me right into the next question that I wanted to talk about, which is President Biden's executive order, which he recently signed. There were a lot of provisions in it. It wasn't exclusively about LGBTQ seniors, but there were several provisions which were very specific to this population. So Aaron, could you kind of break it out for people and explain what they were and why they are important?
Sure. I'll highlight two of them. The first one I'll highlight is language in the EO, the executive order, calling on the Administration for Community Living, which is kind of like our federal Department of Aging and Disability, to designate both LGBT older people as well as older people living with HIV as target populations, or so-called great populations of greatest social need, under something called the Older Americans Act. And the Older Americans Act is the primary vehicle for the organization and delivery of social and nutrition programs in our country. So it funds programs like Meals on Wheels, shore assistance, transportation assistance, legal assistance, falls prevention, all these programs that enable people, older folks, to age in place. And LGBTQ plus older folks, like everyone else, for the most part, want to age, as Sherrill mentioned, in their homes, in their communities, and not end up necessarily in a long-term care setting. And we find, for many of the reasons we highlighted earlier in the program, that unfortunately many LGBT folks fall through the cracks for any number of reasons. And for that reason, it's really important, and we're very glad that the Biden administration has decided to make designating LGBT folks as well as those living with HIV two of these target populations, so they don't fall through the cracks in the future. The other important thing that the president did was call on the administration to come out with a national LGBT long-term care Bill of Rights. And what that does is for those who do end up in those long-term care situations, there would be basically a laundry list of the ways in which they would be protected from discrimination. So, for example, it would outline making sure that people are referred to with the right pronouns and that they're called by the name they wish to be called, that room placement is actually based on people's gender identity, that people aren't discriminated against based on their HIV status, so on and so forth. And because that's such a challenging time for anyone moving into long-term care, it's particularly challenging for LGBT folks who fear the discrimination they might face. So that's a really valuable thing that the president called on the administration to do. And we're looking forward to working with the Biden administration to make that happen.
So executive orders are important, and we all know that executive orders have definitely moved the needle in a number of issues across many, many different communities in ways that perhaps legislation could not move quite at that point. However, the problem with executive orders is that they can change really, really quickly, which makes this a very fragile kind of progress as we look towards a new election season. And depending on what happens in the White House, things may change. So, Aaron, what would be kind of a better long-term solution to some of this? What kind of legislation? Is it at a federal level? Is it at a state level? Is it a little bit of both? Can you tell people about that? And if there's anything they should be advocating for?
Sure. There actually is a little bit of both. So, as we've been asking the Biden administration to do this, we have been working with partners in states across the country to pass long-term care bills of rights and these greatest social needs designations in states. So we've done that in your home state of California. We've done that here in the District of Columbia. We've done this in Illinois. There's a long-term care bill of rights in New Jersey. So there's a number of examples across the country where we've moved our agenda forward. In the meantime, at the federal level, as you referenced, legislation is always better than an executive order. So we're working with a wide coalition of folks to pass something called the Equality Act, which is a comprehensive LGBT civil rights bill that would explicitly protect people from discrimination in housing, employment, public accommodations like public places, jury service, access to credit, and anything funded by the federal government. It has twice passed out of the House of Representatives, and we're working with folks to try to get it passed out of the Senate. It's been threatened by a filibuster, so we need to get to 60 votes. And as everybody knows, that's quite a challenge. So we're still moving forward on that. We're also working on another piece of legislation that really came to be seen as quite necessary following the decision in the Dobbs case, the abortion case that just came down from the Supreme Court. And that's something called the Respect for Marriage Act. Which for all intents and purposes would ensure that the federal government recognizes marriages validly entered into in states across the country. So that's certainly important for really key benefits like Social Security and other programs on which older folks rely. So we're working again with a large coalition of folks to make sure we pass the Respect for Marriage Act. If folks are looking for things to do, we encourage them to call their senators and ask them to support the Respect for Marriage Act, because just like the Equality Act, that has passed out of the House, but now we needed to get it across the finish line in the Senate. So please call your senators and ask them to support the Respect for Marriage Act. And you can still ask them to support the Equality Act because we want to get that over the finish line too.
And I think it's important that people know they should call their senators, whether they know their senator is supportive or not. Even those supportive senators do need to hear from their constituents. And I think that's something people don't gloss over.
Yeah, absolutely. Because otherwise they'll think we don't care about it, and we do care about it. So that everyone needs to hear from you.
Thank you. So Sherrill, because you're on the program side and you're on the resource side, you're probably hearing a lot of those frontline stories, and you're hearing as things are changing in this country, there has been a lot of hostility. There has been a lot of pushback against the progress that we are making. Are you seeing more healthcare facilities trying to opt into more inclusive practices, or does it still feel very much like you are pushing rather than assisting? Is it beginning to change? And are you seeing change in more conservative places?
Yes, definitely. I do have a lot of hope in what we're seeing on the ground. We have, I'll speak specifically to area agencies on aging. When we talk about, the executive order that Aaron was just mentioning, area agencies on aging are actually the organizations on the ground administering the Older Americans Act funding. So they're supporting, nutrition programs, home repair, care management, all these things that really LGBTQ older adults may need to stay independent in their homes. We're working with hundreds of area agencies on aging across the country who want to be LGBTQ inclusive and welcoming. That's important because regardless of what happens, at the executive level, with legislation, there are providers in the community that are saying we are welcoming to LGBTQ plus older adults. Come see us. We want to support you. The same thing is happening with our long-term care retirement communities. There's a number of states that don't have an LGBTQ plus Bill of Rights, but there are organizations in those states who are stepping up and saying, we want to be welcoming to the LGBTQ plus community. So that's work that's really important. And, I don't think it gets enough, it's not highlighted enough, in the work that we do.
Yeah. Yeah. And Erin, at this point, given that it is kind of a precarious legislative situation that we have the EO, we don't necessarily have legislation. And obviously every situation can be a little bit different. But if we are talking about an LGBTQ elder who is seeking care and they are experiencing some level of discrimination, at this point, what kind of recourse do they have, particularly if they are living in a state that does not have one of the healthcare bills of rights?
Well, I think it's important to note, even as we advocate for these explicit protections at the federal level, some of these protections still exist nationwide. So I'll give you a good example of that. Probably 1 or 2 years ago now, the Supreme Court came down with a decision, the Bostock decision, which said that LGBT folks are protected from discrimination in employment under Title VII. The Biden administration and many courts have interpreted that to say any federal law that bars discrimination on the basis of sex should also be interpreted to protect people from discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. It just so happens that the Fair Housing Act is one of those laws. It explicitly protects people from discrimination on the basis of sex, among other factors. So given that analysis from the Bostock decision applied to the Fair Housing Act, LGBT folks all across the country, no matter where they live, arguably are supported, and they are supported in the eyes of the Biden administration, and again, by many courts, from housing discrimination. So for that reason, say you're in a long-term care facility or you're seeking elder housing or whatnot, and you do face discrimination, you can certainly file a complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development about that discrimination. We would also encourage you to call organizations like Lambda Legal, the ACLU, the National Center for Lesbian Rights, all of whom potentially could represent that person and help them fight for their rights.
Thank you. Because I think sometimes the lack of clarity on where things are does leave people feeling hopeless. And I mean, and even as somebody who I work in this area, it feels really overwhelming to me. It's a little bit like a maze. So we've kind of focused on the bad stuff. I don't want to completely focus on the bad stuff. I think there is so many good things happening. We are seeing so many good programs. So Sherrill, I would love for you to talk a little bit more about some of that big progress that's happening, and specifically some of the programs that SAGE is doing, the ones that you're managing, but other ones that people should know about. Because I think there are a lot of people who are interested in this. I just don't think they know what is out there for them.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the programs that we've really seen a lot of success with, especially through COVID, is a new program from SAGE called SAGE Connect. And it's a friendly, it offers a connection to someone in the community who can offer a once a week phone call to older adults who may be feeling socially isolated. So that's a wonderful program that people can connect with, SAGE Connect. One of our other programs is SAGE Sense. And that is a financial education program. And we've seen a lot of success with that program as well. As we hear about the high rates of inflation, people are actually being able to save money and to really, increase their financial security through programs like this. So we would encourage folks to pay attention, to those programs that are coming out. Also lift up the Long-Term Care Quality Index again. We opened the first official survey for that Long-Term Care Quality Index, where long-term care communities across the country will have the opportunity to take a survey and really show how they are LGBTQ welcoming and supportive. So we're excited for that program as well.
If somebody is interested in the index, how perhaps they know they work at a facility, they know of facilities. How do people opt into that? Because I think that just like the corporate equality index, we saw huge growth as more people found out about it. How would they go about making a connection there?
Yeah, we encourage folks to go to the website, thelei.org, and organizations can actually fill out the survey or fill out a form to become part of that survey. If you know of someone who works in a long-term care community and you think they should be a part of this program, we encourage you to reach out to them as well and let them know about the program and how they can, become involved.
And what about some of, because I am a trainer in real life, what about some of the education programs and training programs that SAGE has? So if there is a facility in your community, maybe they're looking for it, maybe you know that they need it, how would they go about reaching out to SAGE and connecting with opportunities like that?
So the program for our training and credentialing, it's called SAGE Care, and you can learn more about that program at sageusa.care. We've trained, I think we have over 500 organizations now across the country who have become SAGE Care credentialed. And, so we're always lifting up those programs and really encouraging folks to take advantage of the training that's out there to really put a face on, the organizations that are friendly. And it takes you beyond just simply raising the rainbow flag.
Yes.
But actually investing in the ongoing training and education of your staff.
And I appreciate that you said ongoing. I think sometimes people think that education, especially in work environments, which healthcare is kind of a one and done thing, but we are constantly evolving this conversation, even inside of the LGBTQ space. And I think that making sure that comes back is so important. And Erin, for you, if people want to do a little bit more learning about the legislative issues, is there content on the SAGE website that you would point them to? Are there any opportunities there beyond please call your legislator about the Equality Act and marriage?
Yes, what I would encourage folks to do, I need to Google this to figure out where to send people, but we just started, I'm going to do the SAGE Action Squad. We just started something called the Action Squad, which is a list folks can sign up for on our website, where we will keep people in the know about all the things happening on the SAGE advocacy front. So if you go to sageusa.org/SAGE-action-alerts, so it's SAGE Action Alerts, but all separated by dashes after our name, you can sign up for the Action Squad right there. And we'll keep you in the know if we have call campaigns. I'll give you one example of one we're working on right now. There is Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act, which is the non-discrimination provision. The Biden administration has proposed updating it to explicitly include protections based on sexual orientation, in addition to gender identity. And they need to hear from us that we think this is important, that LGBT folks should not face discrimination in healthcare settings. So if you sign up for the Action Squad, we'll tell you all about it and give you an easy way to write into your representative, or not your representatives, to the Biden administration about this.
Thank you so much. I think the live Googling proves how very live our show actually is. Also, I'm totally signing up because I want to be part of a squad. It just kind of sounds good.
That's the goal. That's what we were thinking of.
It does sound really good. It kind of sounds fun. So my friends, thank you so much for everything that you do. And thank you for spending time with us. Erin, now that you've been brought here once, we'll drag you back again at some point. Sherrill now knows I will haunt you at some point. But thank you for your work. Hopefully we will send some people to your website to learn a little bit more. And if we can ever do anything, we are here to amplify your messages.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jean Marie.
Thank you. Well, everybody, that gets us to the end of yet one more show. We will be back again next week with another conversation. So make sure you look to see what we are talking about. As a quick reminder, PFLAG is still running its Read with Love program, and you definitely want to get involved with that, especially as we get back to school and hear about even more book bannings. So if you would like to help restore the right books to the bookshelves in your community, please visit us at pflag.org/readwithlove to learn a little bit more how you can do that. I am going to once again go back to encouraging people to please get themselves vaccinated for all of the various and assorted things that are popping up in our space. And as we remind you at the end of every single show, we want to see you run fast, laugh hard, and most of all, please be kind. We'll be back next week with another episode of Something to Talk About. Bye, everybody.